بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي فطر الخلائق بقدرته ونشر الرياح برحمته ووتد بالصخور ميدان أرضه، ثم الصلاة والسلام على حبيبه ونبيه الذي بعثه رحمة للعالمين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله الطاهرين وصحبه المنتجبين. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل فرجه. Praise be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who brought forth creation through His supreme power and majesty, and dispersed of winds through His compassion, and with the rock made firm the unstable earth. We convey our greeting and salutation to the Holy Prophet of Islam and his pure progenies. Sisters and brothers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We are gathered here tonight, tomorrow being Arbaeen, and this is the night before Arbaeen. We are gathered here to commemorate Arbaeen and discuss some of the issues involved in this event. There is a hadith from Imam Hussain al-Askari salawatullah wa salamu alayhi, although similar hadith exist also from Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq and possibly Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salatu wasalam, that states alamat al-mu'min khams: salat al-ihda wa khamseen, ziyarat al-arba'een, wa takhattum bil-yamin, wa ta'fir al-jabeen, والجهر بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. According to this hadith, and possibly three other sources similar to this, that they say the signs of a true believer, a mu'min, are five. Number one, a clear dedication to the 51 rak'ah of salat during 24 hours, which includes ta'qibat, wajibat, as well as salat al-layl. Then ziyaratul arba'een, reciting ziyaratul arba'een. Then having a ring on the on the right finger or the right hand. Ta'fir al-jabeen, having signs of sujood on the forehead, and saying Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim loud. These are considered to be the five signs of a believer. Unfortunately, most people, when it comes to Ziyaratul Arba'een, have interpreted this hadith literally. That if you were to have a ring on your right hand and somehow manage to get some large sign in the forehead and do the 51 rak'ah and ziyaratul arba'een, you are considered to be a believer. What this literal interpretation misses is that belief is totally different from the way we dress and the way we behave. Belief and iman is an internal, organic feeling or characteristics that develops, has nothing to do with the signs that we wear outside. Even if we put the entire fingers in both hands, we fill them up with various rings and so on, it's not going to change the reality of somebody if deep down we are not submitting and we have no understanding of Allah and our relationship with Allah. Iman is organic concept. There's nothing to do with the signs outside. Certainly, if we were to follow habitually the 51 rak'ah, it helps in getting somebody closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But that doesn't say much about Iman if the heart is not there. And so that's one thing. But Arbaeen as an historical event, we're beginning to see during the past, I'm sure people who have followed the events in Karbala have noticed millions upon millions of people going and following each other, going to ziyarah from Karbala, from Najaf to Karbala, walking either barefooted or just walking. Ultimately standing together tomorrow, the day of Arbaeen, in going through the usual ritual of reciting Ziyarat al-Arbaeen and the mausoleum and everything else. During the last 10 to 15 years, the Western media and even media within our own Muslim countries have paid too much attention to the quantity of people that appear. Well, in 2014, it was 7 million. In 2015, it became 13 million. 2018, it became 25 million. This year, because the threat of Daesh has been neutralized, they are expecting 27 or 28 million people to go to Karbala. As somebody who used to live around the area, I find it incredible, if not some kind of a miracle, that Karbala, under normal circumstance, is not able to accommodate the need of its own population. How on earth, during Arbaeen, they are able to provide sustenance as well as comfort and everything else for 27, 28 million people, which is approximately the number of people in Iraq. The population of Iraq is around 28 to not more than 30, around that figure. So this is, one has to admit that even if the theological basis we cannot resolve one way or the other, the fact that Karbala is able and Iraq is able, particularly the city, is able through the sacrifice of the population to look after, entertain these people that are coming, by the way, from all over. It used to be primarily from, say, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and itself, and Iran, and few Pakistan and others. Now, even non-Muslims have begun to arrive in Karbala. I saw a delegation, Armenians from Iran, Jewish community from Iran, the Christian community from Georgia, and others from various parts of the world now sharing or being part of the crowd to go and visit. The pictures of the cardinals and great figures within Christendom and even Jewish and others that go to Karbala and bow out of respect for Imam Hussain is now all over the newspapers and the media. But what I want to focus upon tonight is to look at the literature that we have regarding Arbaeen and see how we can analyze this literature. Although Arbaeen has taken huge amount of space within the literature, particularly Shia literature. But unfortunately, most of these literature focuses on secondary issue rather than the core of the Imam Hussein's uprising. They first, almost all of them, as soon as they start talking about Arbaeen, they start with number one, the fact that Arbaeen, the number 40, has some kind of a mystical connotation within it. And they start citing a number of ahadith, verses in the Holy Quran, to say that because of these ahadith, because of these verses in the Holy Quran, then there must be something unique about number Arbaeen. Then they bring them, relate them to the issue of Karbala. Number one, they say that the Holy Prophet became or given the prophethood at the age of 40. That's one thing. There is a hadith that if anyone by the age of 40, the good deeds of his or hers are not exceeding the bad deeds, then there is a problem. There's a huge issue to be resolved. Prophet Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, according to the verse in the Holy Quran, that clearly states, فَتَمَّ مِيقَاتُ رَبِّهِ 40 لَيْلَةً. That Prophet Musa completed his submission to the command of Allah and witnessing the glory of God 40 nights. من أخلص لله 40 يوما فجر الله. If you dedicate and purify your heart for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And by the way, mystics and Urafa have spent huge amount of time on this particular hadith and literature on this particular hadith. Poets as well as literal writers, they have given huge amount of space that as what does it mean, man akhlasa lillahi 40 yawman, to be pure, to purify your heart for the sake of Allah for 40 days, and how we can do that. If we look at our literature or our ahadith, we clearly conclude that numbers, contrary to some people similar to Ismailis and others, that clearly state, or Batiniyas, that clearly state that there is some mystical effect in these numbers, number 7, number 9, or number 40, or number 12, or number 6, according to various schools. Our ahadith that we have from Ahlul Bayt clearly states that there is no specific meaning or specific secret value for these numbers. Clearly, they make reference to a length of time more than once. And everyone that wants to achieve ultimate taqwa, depending on their starting point, they require different time and different struggle and different jihad to go through. A person might go through it much quicker, and others might go through it much later and much longer. So we don't have anything that clearly states that the number Arbaeen specifically has some unique value. What we witness during at least the last 5 years, that after 13 centuries of that Imam, after the death or the martyrdom of Imam Hussain salawatullah salam alayhi, now we are beginning to see all those values that were hidden or intrinsic in the uprising to become known to the non-Muslims before Muslims. Because unfortunately Muslims conditioned to see Imam Hussain purely in the historical context and in the tragic context, they really cannot come out of the closet, so to speak, and focus on the values of the uprising itself. There are pictures of non-Muslims standing up in Canadian Parliament and talking about Imam Hussain as a character, not within the context of the tragedy that he and Ahlul Bayt went through, but looking at it purely on the universal values as a human being. As a human being. Can we, as somebody said, can we really stand aside and look at this incident and say nothing when we see, for example, this family of the grandson of the Holy Prophet with his entire family are being slaughtered and denied water on a hot day in Ashura on plain of Karbala. For what reason? For simply calling for justice, equity, and a balance in the society. They see it through this, for truth against corruption. Haq versus batil. Can anyone, as this is the quote that we have, can anyone be insensible to the tragedy of the family of the Prophet of Islam, being deprived of water in a burning desert and then massacred while striving to uphold truth and justice in the corrupt world? They don't say anything about the whole a historical tragedy. They reduce this into the values. Can anyone remain unmoved by the killing and the beheading of a 6-month-old child? Can anyone absolve Yazid and his band of murderers of this grave injustice done to women of the Prophet's household as they were marched thousands of miles to be paraded as outlaws? These are the values that clearly taken by these individuals, whether it is, we have seen now pictures in India, Hyderabad, as Hindus, Muslims, non-Muslims, Christians, Jews coming together to commemorate a unique character that stands for a number of universal values, that we humans consider these values close to our heart, irrespective of where we have come from as far as our religious inclination. So, if we now come out of this hadith regarding the 40 days or the secret nature of the 40 days, then we come to the issue of Arbaeen itself as 40 days after Ashura. If we look at the early sources, such as Sheikh Mufid, Sheikh Tusi, and others, they clearly state that Arbaeen was a day in which Ahlul Bayt managed to get to Medina. And also, Arbaeen was the day in which Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari, one of the close disciples of the Holy Prophet, was able, although he was blind at the time, he was able to get to Karbala and be the first person that visited the grave of Ahlul Bayt over there. These are the two events that early literature certainly talks about. There is nothing about, but unfortunately, as we move on after Sheikh Mufid and Sheikh Tusi, we begin to notice gradually the issue of return of Ahlul Bayt from Sham to Medina. An addendum has been added to it through Karbala. Suddenly the concept of visiting Karbala to go back to the Medina has been brought on, although there is nothing in either the book of Sheikh Mufid regarding this issue of Sheikh Tusi, Sheikh Mufid in Masar al-Shia and Misbah al-Mutahajjid in Sheikh Tusi. We're beginning to see in the latter literature, they are beginning to create this. Once this issue was added, it created or generated huge amount of space for discussion. Was it technically possible for Ahlul Bayt to travel after staying all this long to Kufa, traveling to Sham, staying in Sham, to be able to manage to go to Medina, to Karbala and be there within the 40th day? Two schools of thoughts have developed, and one that I believe they are more right in this, that they say the whole story is been added later, and there was no such thing as Ahlul Bayt going to Karbala on their way to Medina. And even those who accepted it, they say technically it's not possible. There are a number of others that disagree. There are books, articles written about this issue, which I really don't want to get involved. What we really need to talk about here is that go back to some of the things, or read or re-engage some of the things that we talked about in the Muharram, not this Muharram past, but the Muharram before, about over a year ago. In the discussion that we had regarding whether the uprising can be called a revolution or a revolt against Yazid, we talked about the goal of Imam Hussain salawatullah wasalam alayhi on a short and medium and long term. Because some people considered the uprising to be a failure. Why? Because immediately it was unable to secure the success that it needed, the toppling of Bani Umayyah. At that time, I maintained that toppling of Bani Umayyah may not have been possible in a short period of time. But certainly what Imam Hussain on a short term intended to destabilize the whole structure of Bani Umayyah's power, that ultimately they will be removed from power, as it happened. When Karbala became the zeal for a number of movements that became a revolution, and constantly after each other, after Ashura, the revolt after revolt, that ultimately led to the destabilization of Bani Umayyah and moving Bani Umayyah from the Amavi dynasty from the Abu Sufyan part into a different branch. But when it came to the goal of Imam Hussain at that time, the short-term goal was destabilization and shaking of at least the conscience of the Muslim population around at the time to begin the revolt and the standing up. But on the long run, Imam Hussain wanted the values that he stood for to be propagated and to be adhered to, and for us to commit to them. And we are the one that we're supposed to deal with those values, as every time we go through Ashura and every time we go through the whole incident of Arbaeen or anything else. Arbaeen, on the one hand, speaks about the success on the short term where Zainab Salamullah alayha and Imam Zain al-Abidin were able to achieve. But on a medium to long term, it is an arena in which we make a commitment that no matter what, irrespective of the historical Hussein and the tragic part of it, we understand that there are certain values within this uprising that we are obligated to unpack them and deal with them and talk to them about other people, because that's the way we can propagate Imam Hussein's uprising and keep the whole issue alive. Unfortunately, if you go through probably 99% of the commemoration that these days take place, there is nothing at all about our commitment to those universal values and how we can implement them. What are the messages? What are our responsibilities in our time? If every time, every era of history has its own Hussein and its own Yazid and Muawiyah, then where do we stand in relationship to the Hussein and the Yazid of our time is critical. Irrespective of what happened to Imam Hussein and the people that were with him. They did their duty. What about our duty? I think Arbaeen, yes, we can go to Karbala, inshallah, if Imam Hussein calls us. We can go to Karbala and we can commiserate, we can commemorate, we can understand what is going on. But because we are not in Karbala, it doesn't mean that we don't have any responsibility vis-a-vis the whole uprising. Wherever we are, in what capacity we are, we have an obligation. So, some people recently, I have noticed that they are coming from a more kind of anthropological, sociological angle. They say Arbaeen doesn't have some kind of a sacred connotation to it, but within the sociology and the time required for concrete and fundamental change to take place, we need about 6 weeks or more. And hence Arbaeen simply is an indication that after Ashura we are making a commitment to pursue the goals of Imam Hussein, follow his ideals, and implement his universal values, but stick to them in a way that after 40 days we are able to change. That 40 days will be able to alter This is the shortest period necessary for a transformation to take place in our life. Similar to the discussion we had during the month of Ramadan. That these people don't look at Arbaeen purely as some kind of a mystical number. They look at it that it's necessary because the least, and by the way, the Urafa that when they look at the hadith, a person who submits to the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for 40 days, they discuss this in detail, that you really need 40 days of constant commitment to a particular lifestyle for a transformation to take place. If you go to any master or professor of Irfan and you ask them, irrespective whether they are men or women, you ask them that you want their guidance for one to change one's life, immediately they ask you, are you ready to commit for 40 days? Because that's the minimum time. So these people look at it from this angle rather than purely that the issue of Arbaeen somehow has a unique, inherent, intrinsic value to it. So Arbaeen for us, yes, we remember. Yes, we stand in commemoration. Yes, we should practice and understand the reasons for Imam Hussein's uprising and be mindful of those universal values. But unless we implement those values in our life, I don't think we really truly understand, or at least pay our homage and give credit to the Arbaeen the way we should. If we go to Arbaeen, to go to ziyarah, whether ziyarah Zainab Salamullah alayha, as I indicated a couple of days ago in Khutbah al-Jum'ah, on the way to ziyarah we commit sins. During the time that we are there, we commit sin. And we come back, we commit sin. What is the relationship between us and the person that we want to go and visit? What do we understand about their life? If we go to Karbala and do the same thing, unfortunately the same applies to Hajj. We go to Hajj, we go through the tawaf, we go through everything, but deep down, nothing changes. Imam Zain al-Abidin salawatullah salam alayhi, in one of his disciples come to him, and the same story is narrated from Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq salawatullah salam alayhi, that talks about the day of sacrifice, Eid al-Adha. And Imam tells this particular person, when you slaughtered your animal, did you imagine that this animal embodies the attachment that you have to this world? And what holds you back from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? He said, no, ya ibn Rasulullah. He said, then you haven't done truly the sacrifice that you want to do. By taking a leaf out of this story, out of this book, if we go to Karbala and we come out with no change whatsoever, we go and listen to the majalis and we come out, continue with our life as if nothing has happened. A few days ago, may God bless his soul, I was looking at a number of literature and I came across a number of muhadarat, Marhum al-Allama Sayyid Muhammad Hussain Fadlallah, that he talks about the same thing in Beirut. That Imam Hussain doesn't want our cries, doesn't want our beating of the chest. Imam Hussain looks for fundamental transformation in our life to understand what is our responsibility in our time. Now, he puts it into the context of the United States as a colonial power, Israelis and occupying forces, etc., etc., and those who stand up to them. So he says, Karbala of my time is this. In Lebanon, when we stand vis-a-vis facing these individuals, those who stand in opposition to injustice are, according to him, in the camp of Imam Hussain, and those who support in the camp of Bani Umayyah and Ibn Sa'd. The same thing goes in Iraq. The same thing goes in Syria. The same thing goes in Iran. Imam rahmatullah alayhi, at the beginning of revolution in Iran, used the same metaphor to explain where his position was and what is our responsibility. Ramadan is a transformation. The 10 days of Ashura is supposed to be 10 days of remembering those universal values and changing. From Ashura, why is it that Ziyarat Ashura every day for 40 days is recommended from 10th of Muharram until tomorrow? Every night you recite Surah Ziyarat Ashura and you make a commitment and a pledge that I stand with those who stand with you and I stand against those who oppose you. This is not laqlaqatun lisan. It's not supposed to be just paying a lip service to it. Imam Hussain, A'imma in their general, and Imam Hussain in particular, and the rest of our A'imma, they want a complete transformation of those. Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq tells his disciples, Kunu, be a source of honor for us. Don't bring disrepute to us. How can we do that if we don't embody those values that Ahlul Bayt have embodied? Imam Hussain wants our heart to become the source of enlightenment, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and haqq and justice shines in it. Not we see injustice and pass by. We see poverty and say nothing. We see destitution and we say nothing. We see marginalization and say nothing. We become actively racist in our attitude towards others. And then we claim that we are following of Ahlul Bayt. We use foul language against others. And then we have just come out of ziyarah or come out of mosque or somewhere else. Arbaeen, we have supposed to have gone through these 40 days, even accepting that 40 days or 6 weeks are the basic minimum for the transformation and the lifestyle change. We are supposed to have gone through it. Can we honestly put our hand on our heart and say, yes, now from tomorrow I can stand and say, I'm a different person from the person that I started beginning of Muharram? If not, then 50 days have been wasted. If yes, congratulations. That's what Imam Hussain wants. If we don't, Imam Hussain stands on the day of Ashura between his and recites Salat Awwal al-Waqt. How many of us have that commitment in our life? No matter what, I'll take the first 5 or 10 minutes to do Salat Awwal al-Waqt. Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullah salam alayhi in the Battle of Siffin stands to do the prayer. Ibn Abbas says, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, is it the time for prayer now? He says, we fight them because of the fundamentals of the prayer. We fight Bani Umayyah on fundamentals of the prayer. These are the issues that we really need to pay attention to learn from the character of Imam Hussain. The Shami comes to Medina and says, I have heard a lot about Hussain ibn Ali. Where is he? They say he's in the mosque, sitting in that corner. He goes to him and starts the abusive language that they have learned during Bani Umayyah in Sham. Imam smiles and says, I take it that you are a stranger in our city. If there is any help I can give, assistance that I can give, I'll be more than happy to do so. Now, جادلهم بالتي هي أحسن. Suddenly, he was expecting Imam Hussain to be abusive. This kind of behavior changed him and became apologetic. Invites him to his house, Let him see what's going on. This guy is used to the pomposity of the palace of Bani Umayyah and Muawiyah and everything else. Comes to Imam Hussain, this person that Bani Umayyah for 60, 70 years cursed Amir al-Mu'mineen for it. He goes in and sees very simple lifestyle. And then asks, how is your financial situation? Says, poorly. Imam asked Qambar, is there anything left from Khiraj of Mecca? He says, yes, Ya Ibn Rasulullah, bring it. The keys comes, gives it to him, and apologizes. This is not enough. I don't have more than this. The force of circumstance. Are we learning about this from Ahlul Bayt? Is this the character that we, or akhlaq that we have learned from others? Or deal with others? Unfortunately, we are not being taught. Tonight, in about a couple of hours, you're going to hear the same repetition of last year and the year before and the year before and the year before it. And possibly for the years to come. The script is clearly defined. We come to cry for ourselves because of the depression that we have from the lifestyle, and then go home released from some of that depression, and we think we have achieved something. If the heart is not changed, then there is a question mark. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us the privilege of being among the true followers of Ahlul Bayt, inshallah, and to enlighten us with the true understanding of the values that Ahlul Bayt have, and we are expected to propagate those values for the rest of our life. As to whether we will be able to go to ziyarah, that's a privilege that Sahib al-Bayt, if he wishes, he will grant. Thank you very much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.